CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber with the top stories this hour. Police in London are accused of heavy-handed tactics after breaking up a vigil mourning a woman who was found dead last week. Voters in Germany cast their ballots in state elections, seen as a test for the ruling coalition ahead of September's federal poll. 1 year on, remembering the start of Europe's coronavirus struggle, we meet the doctor who diagnosed Italy's first case. And big apple biking. As more New Yorkers get on two wheels, a campaign gears up for more parking facilities. London's police service has been criticised for being heavy-handed during a vigil for Sarah Everard, whose body was found last week. A serving police officer has been charged with her kidnap and murder. Hundreds of people gathered on Saturday to pay tribute to the 33-year-old, despite the official event being called off. Her death has triggered a public debate over women's safety. Our correspondent Luigi Barkle is live at Clapham Common in South London, near to where Sarah Everard was last seen. What's the mood there like, Nuid?
Yeah, it's pretty sombre here, Paul. Hundreds of people turning out today to pay their respects once again to Sarah Everard, who was last seen alive just a matter of metres away from where I'm standing. As you can probably see behind me, people still coming here, still laying flowers, still paying their respects. But it was a very different scene less than 24 hours ago when police ended up actually arresting 4 people here. And it was an event that was supposed to bring the community together, but the events of last night had a very different effect. It started out as a peaceful tribute to remember the life of 33-year-old Sarah Everard, who was allegedly kidnapped and murdered while walking alone in London 10 days ago.
How many women? How many more? How many women? How many more?
But as night fell, the scene descended into chaos. Police tried to clear some of the protesters at Saturday's vigil. 4 people were arrested at the event, which had earlier been officially called off amid concerns it could spread the coronavirus. Following the clashes, officers defended their actions.
Police must act for people's safety. This is the only responsible thing to do. The pandemic is not over, and gatherings of hundreds of people from right across London and beyond are still not safe.
Others say the police were heavy-handed, and this is now a political row, with the head of London's Metropolitan Police Force facing calls to resign. The country's Interior Minister called the scenes upsetting and has asked for a full report into the incident. More than 1,000 people attended the gathering, which took place hours after a serving London police officer was charged with Sarah's kidnap and murder. And the disappearance on the streets of a major city has resonated with others.
I think we've all experienced being catcalled in the street, you know, having people shouting things at you.
I've experienced sexual harassment on the tube, in pubs. I went to university in London, so it was something quite pervasive to my friendship group at least.
I literally had somebody stick their hand up my skirt while moving through a nightclub.
I have been literally assaulted in a taxi by a taxi driver.
Things do feel a lot calmer here today, but tensions do remain high, Paul. The police say that instances like Sarah's disappearance do remain very rare, but it has sparked a national debate about how safe women in the UK actually feel. There are concerns that harassment, violence, abuse are just becoming a daily occurrence for many women in this country, and that's why so many have come out, and that's why the sense of feeling around this issue has been so severe. Paul.
And we had a lot of criticism from across the political spectrum. What's the government saying?
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a mixed response. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, he said that he and his partner, Carrie Symonds, were going to light a candle last night, as happened across the entire country. People all over the UK showing their respect for Sarah Everard. But London's Mayor, Sadiq Khan, he put out a statement a short while ago saying the police's tactics were completely unacceptable, as he called it. But this is part of a wider problem for the government. They're in a really difficult position. On the one hand, they don't want to be caught not supporting an issue like women's rights. On the other hand, they don't want to be seen as though they're anti-police, and that's why I think we've seen a bit of indifference, if you like, from the central government at least. But more broadly, there could be wider ramifications for this. Tomorrow in Parliament, a new bill will be debated, the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, it's called. Bit of a mouthful, but what it's essentially going to do is to give police more powers to deal with protests and a whole range of other things. The government says that it's necessary because what we've seen in recent years, if you look at things like the Extinction Rebellion protests, which disrupted large parts of London, they say the police need more power to deal with these sorts of modern protests. The last time the law was changed was back in the mid-80s, but critics say it could be a very detrimental step and it could stop people's right to peacefully protest in this country. Paul.
Norwegia Barkle reporting live from South London. Thank you. And we're joined now by Jo Atkins-Potts, who is the co-chair of the group Feminists of. Thank you so much for being with us today. If I could first of all get your reaction to how the police handled the vigil last night and those really unfortunate scenes.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me. I think the police absolutely did not handle this well, and that is an understatement. But, you know, we've seen this before with other movements, the BLM protests, the Extinction Rebellion, and other women's marches throughout history, that before the police turned up, they were socially distanced, respectful, peaceful. And then, you know, in last night's case, a group of people who were against, a group of men started yelling obscenities, making women feel you know, even more emblazoned for why they were there and what they were acting for. The police arrived, then came the heavy handling, the aggression, the putting their hands on women, making women out to be this threat. And, you know, now that's the focus. And the key takeaway for me from last night, or the key heartbreak thing for me last night, was that last night, this week, should have been that women have had enough and that violence against women and girls has to end, and look at this solidarity because we all see ourselves in Sarah's story, and that's what the key takeaway should have been, and it wasn't, and it isn't, because this was so poorly handled.
So there are these calls for the head of the Metropolitan Police, Dame Cressida Dick, to resign. Do you think that needs to happen, or would it not make any difference?
Look, if Cressida Dick resigned today, now, that would not change that violence against women needs to end. My issue is not with Cressida Dick or with any specific police officer. My issue is with the fact that misogyny is so ingrained in our culture. It's so ingrained in the structure of our culture. This is bigger than one police chief, one police force. Radical change has to be the priority and is needed now.
The alleged kidnapping and murder of Sarah Everard has certainly shocked and appalled the country, and it seems to have really tapped into this deeper anger about violence and abuse towards women and girls. What kind of policy changes would you like to see come about to make the UK safer for women?
Misogyny should be a hate crime. That is the policy change that I would like to see. A hate crime is, you know, it's a prejudiced, motivated crime against someone based on their membership to a certain group or race or social group. And that, to me, would be the start of seeing this change, from seeing violence ended against women.
And let's talk a little bit more about the extent of the issue. You know, how widespread is the problem of violence against women? The police keep saying how rare, you know, what allegedly happened to Sarah Everard is. But the figures on abuse and harassment and rape show that that really isn't very rare, is it?
It isn't rare. You know, it's not, oh, this might be a daily occurrence, or, oh, it has always been a daily occurrence. It is, you know, my personal experience as a woman, I can tell you it is a daily occurrence. From the, you know, our community group, women are that's the outcry that we're hearing, is that this isn't new. We have marched against this for years, for generations, and 97% of women have been sexually harassed. 97%. This is not a new thing. This is so widespread, and we need men to be willing to listen, to stop the defense, for them to believe us and take on the responsibility to see change. And we need politicians to put this at the forefront of their agenda to stop this now. Enough is enough.
Yes, indeed. Jo Atkins-Potts, really good to get your thoughts today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Germans are voting in 2 state elections. The outcomes are being closely watched as they could have an impact on party's national standing ahead of September's vote to replace Chancellor Angela Merkel. Ryan Thompson reports from Stuttgart.
It's a busy, unusual and so-called super election year in Germany. 6 states and hundreds of cities will vote on new governments over the next 6 months, ending with a national election that will help determine the first chancellor in the post-Merkel era. The first test is in the states of Rhineland-Palatinate and Baden-Württemberg, where polls open Sunday to far less in-person turnout than usual. Voters have a lot on their mind: the retirement of Chancellor Angela Merkel, new scandals facing her CDU party, and worries about the country's financial future.
It's difficult, especially with the whole coronavirus crisis. Some say vote left, others say go right. It's difficult for each of us to make the right decision.
In Stuttgart, many people say they'll back the ruling Green Party, which is poised to gain even more seats in the state's parliament.
But I think this is important for the Greens if they can hold on to power and even choose who they have a coalition with. That will be a signal on the federal level, I guess.
The Greens have seen their popularity increase nationally in recent years, and there's a high chance that they could be key to forming the next government in September. For the first time ever, party leaders are expected to at least try to make a bid for the chancellery. But while Greens to the left are gaining momentum, center-right parties, which have long been many Germans' bread and butter, are struggling to do the same. This is the first test for Armin Laschet, the successor to Angela Merkel and the CDU, who struggled at the helm of the party over the last 2 months.
The signs for the CDU and Armin Laschet aren't good. Very weak results should be expected for the party.
Thorsten Faas is a political scientist in Berlin who says the CDU will face an uphill battle to remain Germany's biggest party.
They would really like to regain control of both of these states, but the signs do not look good. The ratings for the CDU were going down anyway, and now the so-called mask affair is coming on top of that.
Pollsters have predicted a victory for the incumbents in both of Sunday's elections, with the SPD looking set to keep hold of Rhineland-Palatinate, dampening the spirits of a hopeful CDU.
And Ryan joins us now live. So, Ryan, these elections are being seen as a bellwether. What should we be looking out for when the results start coming in?
Yeah, well, we're about an hour and a half from those exit polls. Of course, those are being held off just for the time being while Germans finish up at their polling places. We're looking at 2 races, and there's 2 big questions to ask from it. Here in Baden-Württemberg, we are keeping our eyes on the Greens and just how many seats they will pick up. We talked about it there in the report. They are poised to pick up more, and that is what the polling does suggest. A little bit farther north, we're looking at the SPD party. They have polled well nationally. They've long been a force to reckon with within German politics, but the question there is how many seats will they lose? And then we're looking ahead of the little bits and pieces that we pick up from these elections over the next few months. How will that play into the greater political picture in September?
And Ryan, are there any other state elections ahead of September's national poll?
Yeah, well, so today marks 2 of 7. There are still 5 more to go, including what's effectively a state election in the capital city of Berlin. It's called a super election year for a reason. And as I mentioned there, we're keeping an eye on trends because even the slightest little political movement that may seem small within a state election it could have much larger national political implications, and even beyond that, potentially at the EU level. In December, a number of Germans were polled, effectively in a poll that said, if you were to be asked tomorrow who you would vote for in a federal election, 36% of respondents said that they would support Merkel's CDU-CSU alliance, which is now under the control of Armin Laschet. 15% said they would go for the SPD. 22% said they would go for the Greens. The question here is whether that number, of course that was in December, will go up for the Greens, because Merkel's party and the CDU-CSU alliance is facing a number of problems, most recently a mass scandal at one level, a shaky leadership of Armin Laschet, and of course this question of how to exit the pandemic and how this vaccination rollout is actually going.
Ryan Thompson in Stuttgart, thank you. Ireland has temporarily halted the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine. It follows a Norwegian report about 4 cases of serious blood clotting. Irish authorities say they're acting out of precaution, pending further information. Norway halted its AstraZeneca rollout on Thursday, following similar moves by Denmark and Iceland. Demonstrators have gathered in The Hague to protest against Dutch COVID restrictions. It comes on the eve of a general election, with voting spread across 3 days. Last week, a nighttime curfew was extended until the end of March. There have been more than 6,000 cases in the last 24 hours, the highest increase since mid-January. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he won't grant a second Scottish independence vote. That's even if the Scottish National Party wins the parliamentary elections in May. First Minister and SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon says an election victory would be a mandate for another referendum. But Scotland rejected independence in 2014. Still ahead here on The World Today. Clashes continue in Myanmar as the acting leader of the ousted government calls for a revolution.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time, because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
Welcome back. A reminder of the headlines. Police in London have been accused of heavy-handed tactics after breaking up a vigil mourning a woman who was found dead last week. And voting is underway in Germany in state elections that could set the tone for a federal poll in September. Italians have been enjoying a last weekend of relative freedom before new COVID restrictions begin on Monday. As the nation battles a new wave of the virus, schools, shops and restaurants will close in half the country's 20 regions, including Rome. In so-called red zones, residents will only be able to leave their homes for work or health reasons. There will also be a full national lockdown for the Easter weekend. Daily cases have exceeded 26,000, with the rise thought to be linked to the variant first found in the UK. Meanwhile, the Italian government says it will ramp up vaccinations. It's aiming to reach at least 80% of the population by September. Over 100,000 people have now died from the virus in Italy, Europe's second highest death toll. Hermione Kitson travelled to the town of Codogno, Europe's first red zone, to meet the doctor who identified the country's first patient.
For Dr. Laura Ricevuti, it's not easy to recount the moment that changed her life and the fate of the country forever, receiving news that her patient was the first in Italy to test positive to coronavirus.
I said, "Oh my God." And from there it was something awful. It was a bomb that exploded.
38-year-old Mattia Maestri was admitted to Codogno Hospital with pneumonia, high fever and a cough. After a series of tests failed to reach a diagnosis, Dr. Ricevuti and a colleague decided to swab for COVID-19. That was the evening of February 21st, 2020, the beginning of an unthinkable crisis.
We had to gather all the resources psychologically, physically, and also organizationally to confront an emergency that we couldn't believe could arrive so quickly.
The town of Codogno was immediately locked down and declared Europe's first red zone.
It is still difficult to digest what happened on February the 21st. I get goosebumps when I think about it. Within hours, we were discovering that the virus was widespread among us.
16 days later, the entire country was in lockdown. In that time, Dr. Ricevuti was also hospitalized with the virus. Thankfully, she and Mattia managed to recover, but so many others didn't, including colleagues.
The real heroes are them. It's not us.
A memorial stands in their place.
This is our place to remember the many people who unfortunately didn't make it through this battle, but it is also to recognise the resistance and humility of the community.
Due to new variants of the virus, Italy is now battling a third wave of infection. More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. And with cases on the rise again, new red zones have been declared across the country. Doctors say the emergency is far from over.
There is still the pandemic and still the emergency. Everyone needs to do their part or we will never see the end.
A plea that couldn't be clearer as the world officially enters its second year of the pandemic. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Codogno.
The Chinese embassy in Myanmar has condemned attacks on Chinese-owned factories. Several people were injured after more than 20 buildings were set on fire in Yangon. It happened during another day of nationwide protests in which 5 people were reportedly killed, while the acting leader of the ousted government has called for a revolution. Martin Lowe has the latest.
The situation in Myanmar appears to be entering an even more alarming phase. The leader of the deposed government, in a post on social media, has described it as the nation's darkest hour. Killings by the military of unarmed protesters have been continuing at one of the highest rates over the past couple of days. Graphic images and video of the victims have been posted online. The parallel civilian government now says it will try to enact new laws to give people the right to defend themselves against the military takeover. That could potentially lead to shootouts on the streets. In major cities like Yangon and Mandalay, people have been staging torch-lit vigils late into the night in defiance of a curfew. By day, they've camped out behind barbed wire and sandbags. Fires have been started. The military has been roaming the streets, firing tear gas, firing live bullets and taking people from their homes. One activist said the army was acting like they were in a war, and the dead included a 13-year-old child. The military took power in Myanmar on February the 1st, claiming widespread fraud in national elections last November. The country's civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, remains in detention. The US, along with India, Australia and Japan, call for the restoration of democracy in the country.
A British Iranian woman has been charged with propaganda against Iran at a new court hearing in Tehran. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was jailed in 2016, accused of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government, something she has always denied. She finished serving her sentence a week ago. The new charge concerns a rally outside the Iranian embassy in London 12 years ago and an interview she gave to the BBC. The judge said a verdict could come within 7 days. The pandemic has sparked a cycling boom in New York as people avoid public transport. But it's highlighted a critical shortage of places to park bikes, either at home or at work. Sarah Walton reports.
New York may be famous for its yellow taxis, but another form of transportation's now booming here. There's been a 25% increase in cycling in the city during the pandemic. But it's led to scenes like this. Multiple bikes chained to lampposts and flower beds because there just aren't enough official bike parking spaces. Cycling Club President Christopher Matthias is a big advocate for two-wheel travel, but says he wouldn't dream of commuting to work this way because of the lack of reliable parking.
Often you go back to the same spots and the parking is not there anymore because of construction. Bike poles are moved, not returned. They've done a very good job with bike lanes, but the infrastructure for the bike parking has not increased. So I would like to see spaces that are safe, well lit, maybe even sheltered in some ways.
The campaign group Transportation Alternatives has now started a petition calling for the Mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, to invest in more bike racks. Even before the pandemic, the city counted nearly 1.6 million cyclists, but it has just 56,000 dedicated bike parking spots. And even though more households in New York own a bike than a car, car parking spaces outnumber cycle spaces by 100 to 1. Experts in urban planning say it's a problem that could be simple to fix.
Everybody's used to the idea that we get to store private cars on the street, and you could store a dozen bicycles in the same amount of space that a single car is stored. So it's just a matter of reallocating parking spaces and designating specific parking spaces as eligible for bicycles, or making it clear that bicycles are allowed to park in parking spots.
Private companies are now moving in to address the issue. Shabazz Stewart created several free parking pods in New York after having 3 bikes stolen in 5 years. But he struggled to get planning approval from local authorities to build more.
We have financing lined up, we have enthusiasm from communities. What we lack is buy-in from City Hall, right? There's so much red tape that prohibits entrepreneurial green infrastructure development. And what we need is to confront that and to dismantle it where appropriate so that we can build the infrastructure of tomorrow.
New York's Department of Transportation says it does take bike parking very seriously and built more than 1,000 new spaces last year. But cycling groups still hope the city will gear up their efforts to put cycles before cars. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
And finally, the clear waters of Spain's Catalonian coast are a magnet for tourists who often return year after year. Not just people, though. These fin whales, filmed from a drone, have been coming back to the same stretch of coastline near Barcelona for at least the last 7 years. Like humans, they are drawn to the food, in this case krill rather than paella. They are, of course, not bound by lockdowns, flight bans and social distancing rules. And a reminder of our top story again. Police in London have been accused of heavy-handed tactics after breaking up a vigil mourning a woman who was found dead last week. And these are live pictures showing protesters gathering now outside the city's police headquarters. And that is The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, we're available on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion and at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app. From me and the rest of the team in London, bye for now.